just one short at the moment. Do we have any apology? No, so hopefully it should be very shortly. Right then, sorry, I should have said this first. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by way of the Council's internet site. The images and sound recordings may also be used for training purposes within the Council. As you will see from the agenda papers, generally the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangements prior to this meeting. Would members please use their microphones to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphone when you have finished. Members dialing in remotely, please only turn on your camera when you wish to speak, and please remember to switch it off when you have finished. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using any mobile devices during the committee and that any devices are on silent? Okay, do we have any declarations of interest today?
In relation to the Ferns application, I did respond to the pre-planning consultation and made some points, but I remain open-minded in regards to that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Reynolds.
I'm not sure whether this actually counts as a declaration of interest, but just to be on the safe side, just wanted to mention that although I'm the councillor for Rochestone West, I live in the Malpas ward, so for the application relating to Aldi's, I do live in that ward.
That's okay, thank you. Now go to the minutes of the meeting, which was held on the 11th of January. Can I have somebody to propose their true record, please? Councillor Jordan, second. Thank you. Does anybody have any points from these minutes? No? In the pack then we do have added is the Planning Committee Code of Practice for everybody's reading. I'm sure we're all going to read it from the first to the back page, so please can we update ourselves? Thank you.
Just a formal vote that they accept the new code.
Okay, thank you. Also, I've just been told that we need a vote that they are a full paper. Could anybody agree on that, please? Councillor Howell, second. Lovely, thank you. And all in favour, yes, I take it? Yeah, thank you. I'm now going to hand you over to Andrew, who's going to explain the Green Lane Peterstone enforcement notice and stop notice.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, members, this is just a very brief one from me, just to introduce and give you some background on this decision that was made. We were made aware that works were being undertaken at Green Lane in Peterston, and it was determined that we needed to issue an enforcement notice and a stop notice for those works. Due to the urgent nature, this would normally come to Planning Committee, but due to the urgent nature of them, we made a decision, the Head of Regeneration and Economic Development made a decision in conjunction with the Chair that we would issue the enforcement notice and the stop notice. Now, under the standing orders, we can do this, but we have to report the item to the Governance and Audit Committee. That went to the Governance and Audit Committee last week, where the agreement and the decision was agreed and accepted that it was urgent. So it's just a report for information based on that, following up from that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So could I have somebody please to... sorry.
Chair, could I ask a question?
Certainly, sorry.
When was officers aware of the irregularity of this application?
Councillor, the issue was first raised with the council back in August, but at that time we worked closely in collaboration on the Gwent levels with other authorities, and at that time it was raised by NRW and they were the lead authority on it. Further site visits were undertaken in September and then in November, and in November the works were progressing significantly on site, and we were made aware that there was a residential caravan on site. At that point, we became the appropriate authority to take the action. So the next available planning committee would have been the December committee, but the decision was made in advance of that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anything else?
Come back on that, please. You say the next available planning committee was in December, yet you took it to the audit committee, or the ombudsman, on the 26th of January. So why didn't it come back to planning committee first? It would have been far quicker, surely.
No, the decision was made there and then before the December planning committee. But following on from that decision, we have to report the item to the governance and audit committee to make sure they're happy with the urgency in terms of the process taken.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. So can I have somebody please to propose we're in agreement with the item? Councillor Jordan, second. Councillor Watkin, all in favour? Thank you. Unanimous. We now go to item number 1, application number 22/0438. This is the food store in just down the road from us, and the presenting officer is Geraint Roberts.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the application is 22/0438, and it's for an Aldi stores to be erected in Crinder, basically at the back of a large Sainsbury's. Okay. Grant, why can't I see? Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, thank you. There we are. Thank you very much for that patience with that. So the proposal is to build an Aldi supermarket on the site of a former R.J. Mason transport yard in Crinder. The overall site is 0.7 hectares and is currently fenced off and not in use. The building on the site has been demolished, and there is a large pile of recycled aggregate, which is presumably from the demolition process. The proposed store would measure 65 metres by 35 metres on its maximum extents, and would provide 1,315 square metres of retail space, 341 square metres of warehouse space, staff welfare facilities, 113 parking spaces, and the necessary delivery bay and circulation space for vehicles, including the delivery vehicle. Okay, so this is... Sorry, there is a real lag on this, so just bear with me. Right, this is the site then outlined in blue, and the building you can see outlined there is actually gone, but that was the former R.J. Mason building. But the little roundabout there is the Sainsbury's roundabout. You would drive round and you can see the Sainsbury's petrol station here. And you can see Glasswork cottages, which are the nearest dwellings to the site here. To the north of it then is a retained area of hard standing, which is still in use by R.J. Mason. Okay, so effectively that site's been split, for any of you who are familiar with it. Okay, just for a little bit of background, there is already a planning permission for an Aldi's store on this site. So the proposed operator of the store is Aldi's Supermarkets. And back in 2020, the then planning committee granted permission for that store, although officers had recommended refusal. Okay, so there is what planners call a fallback position, something that could be done under the existing permission, but I'll explain about that a little bit more later on. Okay, so there is a permission granted by committee, but against officer recommendation. So you'll notice on this report, officers are recommending refusal again. So the opinion of officers has remained consistent, just to clarify that point for you. Okay, so the site then we've explained. The aerial photograph just basically confirms the location for you. So the site is here, where the cursor is, and you can see adjacent to it the River Usk and Albany Street. Sorry, this is extremely, I say the lag is problematic. It's like I'm broadcasting from the moon. Okay, so this is the site and the aerial photograph shows it, and this large silver building is the big Sainsbury's, just to give you a context of the site and where it is. Right, now you will appreciate that Aldi supermarkets are already operating a store nearby. That is on Discovery Park in the Malpas Road District Centre. So that's the current site. That's currently where they're located. And under the proposal, they would move from this site to the new site. So the current store would not be retained. They would leave here to go there if permission was forthcoming. Okay, so that's where they currently are. But as you'll appreciate, that is in the Malpas Road District Centre. There are other shops around it. Okay, and that's an important point which we'll come back to. Okay. Site as it currently is then, cleared, and just in the mid-ground to the left-hand side, you can see Sainsbury's petrol station, just for context. And you can see Bryn Glass, the wooded area in the background as it rises up. Okay. Again, this is looking north on Albany Road, and the access point to the store, as proposed, would be the one you can see there on the immediate right. So effectively, the access point isn't changing. And again, you can just get context from the display sign for the Sainsbury's petrol station. Okay, we mentioned the River Usk. This is the view towards the site from the other side of a river. So this is close to the new flats which are being built. And the site is basically in here. So this is the mouth of Rinder Pill. It's difficult to pick out, but the site is basically more or less in the centre of that slide. So that'll give you some idea of what longer views across the river will look like. Okay, the NRW flood wall, we'll come back to that as well. That's an important point. The area has fairly recently had the benefit of improved flood defences, and we'll explain more about that in the future. Okay, and again, that's just an indication of context looking north through the site. You can see the river on the right-hand side and the flood wall in the mid-ground of the picture. Okay, then, what will it look like? The layout proposed then is the larger drawing on the right-hand side of the slide. So the white is the building, and the greyed out areas show you the parking and circulation space, and then clearly you can see Crinder Pill on the right-hand side of that slide. And you'll appreciate this is the roundabout at the bottom of the Sainsbury's ramp, for want of a better phrase. Okay, now, we mentioned this fallback position and the permission that was already in place. On the left-hand side of this slide is the layout drawing for the site as approved. Okay, so the brown is the building, and you can see basically the building has moved. Now, the reason why relates back to the NRW flood wall, because you'll appreciate that approved layout puts the building very close to the flood defence. And as we understand it, NRW have issues with that because it makes it difficult for them to maintain or improve that wall in the future. So it's necessitated a replan and moving the building. Okay, so that's more or less why we're here today. Okay. Okay, the layout then, very typical. If you're familiar with the Aldi brand, you'll know the buildings, you'll know that they're fairly consistent. That's very much part of what Aldi's do. They have a consistency across the stores, which means that they're able to keep their costs low and provide a good range of goods to their customers. Okay, so limited storage space, larger retail area, limited space for the staff welfare as discussed in the initial introduction. Okay, what will it look like? Well, it will look like an Aldi. Okay, it's very much on brand for them, so there's nothing much to say about that. You'll all be familiar with the typical buildings that they provide. Okay, the space, as developed, will have very limited opportunities for planting. You'll have appreciated that from the first layout drawing, but this drawing is the landscaping, and it just reinforces the limited opportunities. But the developer will take advantage of what scope they have to provide a degree of soft landscaping, which would be an improvement over the current situation. You'll think back to the slide of the ground as it currently is. It's basically just a large area of hard standing. Okay. And we've got a 3D representation of what it will look like. This is roughly where that slide was looking up Albany Street. So you see the building. This is the position of the existing access point. And just in the background, you can see the motorway overbridges across the Usk here. Okay, so that gives you just a context. So effectively looking north up Albany Street. And again, it's an oldie, so you'll be reasonably familiar with what they look like. Okay then, I'll leave that slide for now, and I'll just talk about the key issues. Now, it's a retail application, it's for a supermarket, and therefore we need to go through a battery of tests as planners and assess the application against them. Okay, now the most important thing is whether or not there is a need for the proposal. Okay, so we talk about retail need, and that can be either quantitative, i.e. there's plenty of money available, the existing shops in the area cannot provide all the services that money could buy, therefore a new shop is needed to soak up that extra spending potential. Okay, now that is the best kind of need in planning policy terms. If you can show quantitative need for your development, that is extremely beneficial for your proposal. All these can't show quantitative need for the proposal under this submission, and they agree. So what they're effectively saying is there isn't a surplus of cash in the area which we can soak up in the new, bigger store. However, there are other benefits which they would point to, and that is qualitative need. Okay? Now, what basically qualitative need does is it refers back to other benefits that a new store could bring, okay, in terms of improved shopper experience, choice of goods that they can stock, more space to display things. So general benefits which will improve the overall shopping experience for customers. Okay. Now, we've got some national guidance which helps us with that. Planning Policy Wales Edition 11 talks about a qualitative assessment, and it says it should cover both positive and negative aspects. So we've highlighted that. You have to think about the good points and the bad points, and may become an important consideration. Okay, so it becomes important in your mind when you're making a decision if it does any of the following. So does it support the objectives of a retail strategy of an adopted development plan? Okay, which is to say, is it an area that's been allocated for retail? Well, it's not. Okay, this is out of any existing retail centre which we've defined in our plan, whereas Malpas Road is a district centre. This isn't. Okay, so we want to move a store from a place where we would expect shops to be to a place where we would expect them not to be. Okay, so it does make that policy assessment and quite difficult. Okay, so we're effectively pushing the snowball uphill in planning policy terms in the view of officers. Okay, is the site highly accessible by walking, cycling or public transport? Well, we say this proposed site basically isn't. Okay, Crinder is a bit of an island. You'll all appreciate it's slightly off from the rest of the city. There's limited ways in. There is no bus service there, so we say it isn't highly accessible. Okay, would it contribute to a substantial reduction in car journeys? Well, we say it wouldn't. Okay, because if you don't go in your car, how are you going to get there? Generally, we think most of the customers will drive because they won't have any other choice. Whereas if a store was in a district centre or a town centre, there would be a possibility of using public transport, such as a bus service. Okay. Does it contribute to the co-location of facilities, i.e. is there something already there, i.e. you could make a trip and kill several birds with one stone? Well, we say no, it doesn't. That's why we have district centres, because there are more than one shop there. You can do several things. You can go to the bank, you can go to cafes, you can do shopping, you can do this, you can do that. Well, none of those co-locational benefits accrue here because of where it is. Okay. Would it add to the vibrancy of a centre? Well, it's not in a centre, so it's not helpful to that. Okay. Now, I've flagged up the next one in red because this is an important point. Would it assist in the alleviation of overtrading? Well, overtrading is basically when a store is doing a lot better than you would expect it to. Okay, is it taking way more money than you would normally expect? And the short answer to that is the existing Aldi store in Malpas Road is overtrading. It's doing really well. And that's part of the reason why they would like it to be bigger. Okay, so we agree that there is overtrading at the existing store, but the next step in that is, so what? Is that causing a problem to anyone? Is it leading to traffic congestion? You know, is it leading to a really poor customer experience? And our answer to that is it's not. Okay, so we can't see any particular problem with the overtrading of this store within the Malpas Road District Centre. We think that's not a difficulty in planning terms. Okay, so although we acknowledge it, we don't think it's got a lot of weight in our decision. Okay. Okay, does it address a locally defined deficiency in provision, i.e. there are no shops in this area, which is obviously a problem for the people who live there? Well, it doesn't, because clearly there is a shop in this area. There's a huge Sainsbury's. Okay, are there lots of new houses being built near it? No. So we can't see that it would address a deficiency in retail provision. Okay. Or would it alleviate a lack of convenience good provision in a disadvantaged area? And we say, well, it doesn't. Okay. So the quantitative test, money, is failed, and we think the qualitative test, shopping experience, is failed. Okay, but that is a judgment. Okay, we've looked at that policy on that slide and said, well, we don't think it meets this. Okay, but it would be free to people to disagree with us on that. Okay, but the money side, well, everyone agrees there's not enough. Okay, Aldi agree, council agrees, council's advisors agree. Okay, so the qualitative test is failed as well in our view. Okay. Right, now moving on then, the next test in a retail assessment is where the new shop is going, and we call that the sequential test. Okay, because what we expect is for new shops to either be in a city centre, and failing that in a district centre, and failing that in a local centre, and failing that next to a centre, which in policy terms means within 400 metres of the edge of it. Okay? This site is not in a centre, and it's not near a centre either. So on first look, it completely fails this test as well. Okay? However, another question you have to ask yourself is there a suitable site for this store in a centre? And our answer to that is, well, no, we can't find one. Okay? So we think the sequential test is passed. Okay, the store, they've looked at where they could go, and there's no place in a centre where they could go. Okay, so we agree that that test is passed. Okay, the next one, though, is a retail impact assessment, because if you're going to build a new store out of centre, like this one, you have to ask yourself, well, what will this do to an existing centre nearby? Okay, will it have such an adverse effect that it will really damage the centre and therefore really damage the retail provision for local people within that area? Okay, and we say basically that this proposal would. We say the loss of a Aldi within the Malpas Road District Centre will be very damaging to the prospects of that centre, won't help with its viability and vitality. It will be problematic if this store moves. Okay, so we think the retail impact assessment test is failed. Now, I've spent quite a lot of time talking about that, but this is a very important consideration in this decision. Okay, we have to run through these tests, as we call them. So what we're effectively saying is one of them is passed, but two of them are failed, and that means overall that the proposal is not policy compliant and should be refused. Okay, so we advise that this application is refused on retail policy. Okay. Right. Now, moving on then, the next key issue which we've identified is flooding, because you'll appreciate from the slides this is next to the river. Okay, now, the river's tidal, it's tidally influenced. The flood defence that NRW have put in defends Crinder from the risk of tidal flooding. However, although the defence is good for now, over the lifetime of this proposal, 75 years, the defence will become inadequate, okay, which is to say that due to global warming effects, sea levels will rise, the tidal effect will be greater, and there is risk that this defence will be overtopped in the future. Not now, but in the future. It will fail. Okay, and what that means is that the site would flood rapidly, and it would flood beyond tolerable levels. Okay, so the site will not be dry for the lifetime of the proposal, for the 1 in 200 year flood event, which is the test event that we have to look at. And if it does flood, it will flood dangerously. Okay, the depth and speed of the water will be very problematic and would result in danger for all, including emergency services. Now, we say again, this is another insuperable problem. There's nothing Aldi's can do to get over this. Okay, the flood defence will not be adequate for the lifetime of the proposal, resulting in a dangerous flood, or the risk of a dangerous flood in the future. Okay, so again, an insuperable problem which they can't address. Okay, moving on then, biodiversity. Because the site is next to Crinder Pill, which is part of a River Usk special area of conservation, so that is a very highly protected ecosystem, effectively. The river and the species that live in it are subject to particular protection. Now, we are of the view that the ecological interests of the river can be protected under this application, so we don't think there is anything that couldn't be effectively controlled to protect the interests of the river. So our view is that the River Usk can be appropriately protected from the development process and from the operational effects going forward. Okay, so this basically pertains to things like noise and disruption from the construction process and operation of a store. It pertains to things like lighting schemes, because we don't want excessive lighting of a riverbank where otters might be living or migrating. But all of this we think we can deal with. It pertains to things like runoff from the site. Okay, we think that, for example, oil drop from vehicles can be dealt with before any water is discharged to the river. And although the site is known to be contaminated, we think that that can be adequately dealt with in such a way that the risk to the river will be mitigated and would not be increased in any way at all. So we're quite content that ecological interests can be looked after. Okay, design and riverfront access. Right, I'll just flip back through the presentation to explain about this. And I'll just go back to what it currently looks like. Sorry, I'm doing this very slowly because of a lag effect on the slides. Now, this is the riverfront. Now, you'll appreciate from that photograph that the site now is currently completely inaccessible to the public. It's in private ownership. There's no public rights of entry. But the council does have long-term aspirations to improve public access to the river, both in planning and in our role as active travel coordinators. Okay, that's something that the government are very keen on, that we should all be moving more, walking, cycling. You know, the overall benefits in terms of mental and physical health and general well-being are well known and understood. Now, this isn't particularly clear, so I'll try and explain. Now, what these lines show, basically running up Albany Road, is a proposed, well, it's an actual cycle route, okay? So there is an active travel route that goes past the site currently, and what the council has aspirations to do, and this is a little more clear, is to enhance that route. Sorry, this is, I just have to move the cursor really slowly. Okay, now the red is what's already there. This is an existing active travel route, and blue is what we would like to see happen. Okay, so you'll appreciate this is our application site. So a route which would run up along the riverfront and then loop back around and tie back into the existing active travel route. So this is in our integrated network map. It's something we've had to prepare under the active travel legislation, and it basically confirms what we would like to do in the future. So we want to secure riverfront access. There isn't any now. And this scheme, if I get to a layout drawing, would provide some. Now, this is still going to be private property. Sorry, this is very frustrating. This would still be private property, but effectively the public would have a way in, and there would be a footway along the car park, along the flood wall, exactly where our policy would require it to be. The only criticism I can make of it is that it would be quite narrow. We'd like it to be a combined footway, cycleway. They're normally about 3 metres wide, and this isn't that. Okay, but in terms of improving public access to the riverfront, this scheme does allow it, although I stress this would not be a public right-of-way and it would still be private property, but theoretically people could get down to the river. This doesn't sterilise our ambition for improved public access in the future. It is what I'm effectively saying, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, design and riverfront access then. We talked about design. It's an oldie. It's very typical. It's not outstanding, but in the context of the site, it's certainly an improvement. So we have no criticism of its overall design, and we acknowledge the improvements to riverfront access, as I've just explained. Okay, archaeological interest then. You'll know from the report that GGAT, our advisors in archaeology, have objected. They say that this site potentially has significant archaeological interest, and they've asked for a desk-based assessment to try and work out what might be there, and then potentially further work following from what that finds out. Now, we haven't asked the applicant to do that. The reason why is because we're objecting to it on fundamental retail policy and flooding policy. Okay, so it seems unreasonable to ask them to do this work and then refuse it anyway. However, it's a material consideration, so we note it and we report it and say it should form a reason for refusal if that's what committee was minded to do. Okay, but we accept it can probably be addressed if it needs to be. Okay, regeneration benefit and employment. Now, you'll appreciate the site is currently employment land. It's a haulage yard. All right, it's not being used, but it could be. Okay, so it has an economic value. Now, what we have in place both nationally and locally is policy that protects what is called traditional employment land, because there is a risk that its relatively low value means it's lost to higher value activities like retail or housing. Okay, and now that might leave the city ultimately short of valuable range and choice of employment land. Okay, just because it's not particularly attractive and it's in a use for parking vehicles, trucks. That of course is economically very valuable. Right? These are important economic activities in any community, any area. So we don't want to lose them willy-nilly, potentially at the risk of economic diversity and choice of site for employers in the future. So we say that the applicant hasn't gone through the necessary tests to show that this land is surplus to requirement. And although we acknowledge that a supermarket is an economic use, right, it employs people, it generates prosperity in the economy through wages, we say that it hasn't been demonstrated sufficiently robustly to say that the value of a supermarket outweighs the value of the land in its current use. Okay, so we picked that up as well. Other issues that we picked up are fairly less important in the overall consideration. So, for example, we noted that Glasswork Cottages is very close to the site. You can just see them on this slide here. However, we think that the amenities of the people who live close by can be protected through the conditional regime during the construction process, and also things like ensuring HGV routings don't use Albany Street, for example. So we're content that residential amenity can be suitably protected if committee was minded to approve. Okay, so I think that more or less covers all of our key points. The report goes into this in great detail. You have our summary, and we've explained our reasoning behind it. So officers objected to the proposal back in 2020. Committee disagreed, which is perfectly entitled to do. We continue to object for the reasons outlined. Now, I've talked for quite a long time, and I'm sure you're ready to make your contribution now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, I'm going to have to call a quick adjournment. I really need to go to the toilet. So I do apologise, okay? Yep. Okay, thank you. Okay, we've had the presentation, and we do have a public speaker supporting this. This is Mr. Rob Jones, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rob Jones, Property Director for Aldi, the person responsible for delivering new store development across South Wales. As many of you are aware, Aldi's Barrack Hill store has been a popular local supermarket for over 20 years. However, the store is almost half the size of the more spacious modern Aldi stores, which we have been opening in Cardiff, Cwmbran, Pontypool and elsewhere. At busy times, the store becomes crowded, with customers queuing down the aisles, a full car park and access and servicing problems. Furthermore, it is not fit for purpose in meeting Aldi's operational requirements any longer and is in danger of being left behind. We are fully aware of the importance of this shop in providing a discount food offer on this side of Newport, and we understand that a deal has been agreed with an operator of the same planning use to occupy the unit upon Aldi's relocation, so members can take reassurance from this. It is a popular store that provides vitally important local employment for over 30 people. But its current setup is not working for Aldi. As a result, we propose to relocate to a new purpose-built Aldi store at this application site back in 2019. Our application was considered by this committee in February 2020, when members of this committee recognised the significant benefits that would arise from the proposal and voted to support the application. Given the various changes that have taken place since then, Aldi has undergone a review of the development proposals, and the application before you today seeks permission for a revised scheme. The principle of the development remains exactly the same as it did in 2020, and all the benefits that the committee recognised 3 years ago will be achieved through this scheme. The benefits include the regeneration of an underused brownfield riverside site, more high-quality jobs, and more choice to aid competition with the dominant out-of-centre superstores in the area. A new store would also be much more environmentally sustainable, with modern heating, PV panels, lighting, chiller doors and insulation. This will represent a significant improvement on the carbon footprint of the existing store. The development scheme before you today also provides additional benefits over and above those from our earlier scheme. We have changed and improved the design of the store, provided direct access to the Crinder Pill, added PV panels to the roof, provided additional cycle parking spaces and charge points for electric vehicles, including infrastructure for 20% of the car park. To achieve that improvement, we have reconfigured the site layout without undermining any of the benefits previously proposed. Aldi has spent years searching for a suitable relocation site. As I have explained, the existing Barrack Hill store is constrained. As we cannot move within the existing site, we are left with some very stark choices about where to direct our investment. If the Council refused this application, it would go against the decision made 3 years ago. We already benefit from planning permission on the site, which is capable of implementation and does represent a significant consideration for you today. We are proposing to you today an improved scheme, which will be a flagship, environmentally friendly store for Newport that you should continue to support. I therefore urge you to stay faithful to the support that you have showed us previously and to approve this improved development. I urge you to maintain your support for Aldi's investment in the city and to deliver a scheme that we can all be proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We also have a ward member wishes to speak. Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for allowing me to come to this planning meeting to discuss some of the issues. Obviously, we're back here again, obviously repeating possibly the same arguments that we had before. First of all, I'd like to speak about the flood risks. River Usk, clearly, as most members know, go right through the heart of Newport, and there are developments all along that riverfront. So I'm questioning, to be honest, that any development there would have the same planning constraints that this particular development would have as well. And that is where the university is. We got houses on the opposite side. The proposed leisure centre would be subject to all this again. So I do consider that we need to start looking about what we're doing with that site, because a brownfield site, every time I go down that area, it's appalling, and something's got to be done there anyway. So what development would we put there, to be honest? The way possibly some of the arguments that have been put forward this morning, is it's only fit for a car park. And I just think, where are we going with this site? You know, it's got to be developed. Something's got to happen along there. Natural Resources Wales spent 13 million in the Shaftesbury area putting flood defences there. Now, we clearly welcome that. And although there was a big assessment on the Crinder Pill at that particular time as well, Crinder Pill has been widened. We've got automatic gates now on the other side of the motorway where we did have flooding over 20-odd years ago, 25 years ago, because they were manually operated. Now they're automatic. And since then, we haven't had floods in the Shaftesbury area. And Shaftesbury was an area that was prone to flooding prior to all this automation and the flood events. So I thank Natural Resources Wales for all that development, because £13 million is not a small figure to spend on flood defences. But I do worry about sometimes that we go on to the point of about the development, the contamination, what's going into the river and all that. Well, Natural Resources haven't got a good track record, have they, across Wales, of what they're allowing pollutions to go into their rivers. And although we don't want to possibly continue with that process, I'd like it to be more as an environmentalist, and I'm very clear about that. Yes, we've got to stop all that, but I think there's been a lot of conditions put on by officers there to mitigate some of those issues that they've already suggested. I'm just trying to get my thing. So all through the report, obviously those conditions have been met. What I'd like to mention, and it worried me a little bit when I did read through the report, and it was a long report, and I think officers have done a tremendous job in all that, and they've brought in a lot of consultants, and I was a bit concerned when I read the report about the Malpas Road District Centre. And I was trying to find out, what's this Malpas Road District Centre? We're talking about the shops on Malpas Road, because if we are, I'll tell you what a district centre used to be like, and I'll just repeat some of this. On Malpas Road, quite a few years ago, we had a TV and radio repair shop, a provision shop, 2 greengrocers, a wallpaper and a paint shop, a do-it-yourself shop, a wool and knitting shop, a post office, Barclays Bank, 2 chemists, a butcher, a baker. I nearly said a candlestick maker, but it's not. It's a hairdresser. And we had parking on both sides of those streets there, so people could come there. What have we got there now? We've got 4 hairdressers, 5 takeaways, a dress shop, a wedding dress shop, a tile shop, 3 general stores and 1 carpet store, and parking only on one side of the road. So if we look at where Aldi are coming from their shop, the customers coming from their shop, they go up Barrack Hill, they go up Queensway, or they go into the town centre and to the east. But in the east, Aldi's already got a shop there, so most of them will go along Malpas Road. So if they go along Malpas Road, they can't stop on the left-hand side, because the only park is on the right-hand side, and you can't park there anyway. Now, I know when Aldi was first mooted about moving into the site where they are now, I had lots of emails and letters and telephone calls from a lot of the grocers that were on Malpas Road saying the effect that Aldi would have on them by going there. Now, I think, if anything, I think it's the opposite it'll have now, because if Aldi does move there, some of those shops, those provisions, will have an extra sort of footfall, because people are not going to go all the way down there to get milk and bread and things like that. So all I'm saying is that I do worry about when we talk about a district centre that. All I'm saying, I want the site developed, and I clearly believe most of the people do as well. Now, I just like to end on this. Just about 3 weeks ago, I put a newsletter out in my area, and I think John received a copy of it as well. And it was there making it clear about what Aldi was proposing, what was going to happen in the area, possibly job creation. There was going to be a better store, and things like that. And I mentioned at the bottom, any member of the public was to write into the to the planning office about the Crinder development of Aldi's. And I also put my email address there and a contact number if they wanted to get in touch with me about the proposed Aldi site. Now, 2,500 houses were delivered in the Shaftesbury area. And how many people have contacted me? Not one. So the people of Shaftesbury are not concerned about this development. Lots of them would like to see the development. So I'm asking Chair and the members really to consider what our original proposal was, that the application should stand where it is, and hopefully that members would consider that we possibly go against what offers the recommendation. I don't like doing that, but I think on this occasion I think it's very appropriate to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's both speakers have said what they wish. Now we'll open up to questions. Anybody have any questions? Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I totally agree with what Councillor Cochrane said. Going back to some of the tests that Gerald said about the substantial tests, it doesn't fit things. Well, one example, Sainsbury's was right virtually in the heart of Newport city centre, where it was by the castle. They moved, considering them to where then the new Aldi's is going, so they took their footfall away from the city centre for that one. Also, as well, where they said there's no footpath, no more with the site with buses. Sainsbury's got their own bus service. Well, Newport Transport does a bus service and down to Sainsbury's. So I can't see why people just can't jump on the Sainsbury's bus and then they go to Aldi's. There's quite a few things which I've noticed, like I said, with the riverbank, everything else. The houses, like Councillor Cochrane said, and with all the development going on along the riverfront as well. So yeah, I totally agree with what Councillor Cochrane said, and I would actually support the application for it to go through to committee.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thanks, Chair. I've actually got a number of questions or comments, mainly directed to Andrew. Do you want them all in one go, or shall I ask them one at a time? I am genuinely open-minded on this because I read the report and I can understand some of the concerns, but actually a lot of the points that Councillor Cochrane made are the points I was going to make myself. So I can see both sides of this. In terms of the need for the store, I can see we had an email from a representative from Aldi's sent to the planning committee outlining some of the economic advantages. I can understand that, the improved employment prospects, the improved economic prospects. And then the flip side of that is what the officers are saying about the potential adverse effect on the Malpas Road district area. I'm just wondering, do you have any data or studies to support that, or are these just sort of impressions or predictions that you've made based on previous similar applications, or do you have any actual hard data to support that? My next question was to do with the flood risks. It seems to me that Natural Resources Wales have already put in substantial flood defences in that area, and in your report you mentioned that those flood defences may not survive the timescale of the planning application. Again, can you be a bit more specific on that? What sort of timescale are you talking about? Are you talking about the whole length of the planning application, or are you talking within a few years? Do you have any more sort of specific detail on that? One of the concerns I do have, and again I just want a bit more detail if possible, is obviously it's very close to the River Usk, which then leads on to some of the protected areas of scientific interest and wildlife conservation and so on. Do you have a little bit more detail about how that could affect those areas, the Newport wetlands, and the closer areas of scientific interest? And my last question is to do with public transport and active travel. You did mention that there are already some proposed active travel routes around the edge of that site, but you also mentioned that they won't necessarily be public rights of way. Could you just clarify that a bit more? Would Aldi's, for example, have the potential to prevent the public using those active travel routes if they were put in place.
Okay, I don't know whether it's
Thanks.
Geraint or is it Andrew?
Sorry, I'll address what I can, Councillor. In terms of the impact on Malpas Road, it does depend who you ask. Let me just, I did jot this down in my presentation note. Right. The loss of turnover by Aldi's relocating would be £17.6 million on the applicant's assessment. Our advisors, who wrote our retail impact assessment, which is a document we have to have to inform retail planning decisions, they estimate 19 million, so a little more. So somewhere in that order, between 17 and 19 million pounds would be lost to the district centre if the store was to locate out of it. Now, clearly, that unit won't disappear in a puff of smoke. It'll still be there. Somebody will occupy it, we suspect. But no one thinks that would be a convenience retailer, i.e. somebody selling everyday food supplies. Okay, it's likely to be a comparison retailer, somebody selling things like sofas or TVs. So we think, although there will be a slight balancing effect because somebody new will come in, we don't think it will supplant, it will make up the difference. We think it will be less. And our concern is that obviously a convenience retailer, you go there frequently to buy things that you need on a regular basis, and therefore there's more chance of linked trips, as we said, the using of other facilities within the district centre. I don't dispute what Councillor Cochrane said about the former vitality of that area and how he's assessed that it has fallen over the years, but that's exactly the point. We don't want these areas to decline further. And that's why the retail policy is protective of them. And that's, it's not just a Newport thing, it's a Welsh Government thing. It's all the way through planning policy in Wales. For protection of these centres because of the benefits that they provide more widely. Okay, so that is the thinking behind it. And it ties back into your sustainability point. The reason why centres are preferred is because they are sustainable locations. They usually have already existing facilities like car parking, they have bus stops, they have bus routes, they have this, they have that. And of course, many of them are historic, therefore they are at the heart of communities when people had to walk because they had no other choice, and therefore they still could. So if you begin to move out of centres, you begin to unravel that sustainability argument to some extent. Now, I know it's a little bit contradictory because I've literally told you there is an active travel route running past the site, but if you read the report, we critique that a little. And of course, you're buying groceries. Again, in the old days, people would shop every day, carry home small amounts. Some still do, but most don't. Most depend on the car. Which is why the Aldi model requires that, level access, single access at grade to push trolleys around, and lots of car parking, because that's their model and that's how people generally shop now. Okay. Right. The wider ecological interest, really we go back and say if you protect the immediate vicinity, i.e. the river, by definition you're protecting everywhere else. So if you don't cause a problem at source, then that problem can't spread. So we're happy that we can do that. Now, the principal concerns relate to the wildlife interest in the river. So there's a fish interest, logically, and an otter interest. They're the prime species issues. But the report basically outlines how we think those species interests can be looked after, both during construction and during the operation. So basically, we don't want to disturb these animals, and we don't want to reduce water quality. So, for example, in the old days, car parks drained to drains straight into the river. Now, if there was oil drop, that oil drop got carried straight into the river. Now, under modern construction techniques, which we can control through condition, we can prevent that. So we're confident that surface water discharges from the site can be clean. And the other issue that we have is how the contamination on the site currently can be contained and won't be released when they build the new shop, if permission is forthcoming. And we're confident that conditions which we typically apply to sites like this on the riverfront will do that job also. So we're confident that the water quality in the river can be looked after, and we're confident that the ecological interest in terms of species can be looked after through the conditional regime. And I can talk about that a bit more if needs be. Was that all of it? Oh, yeah. The flood, yeah. Now the issue, sorry. Yeah. Let me find that. I've just drawn up the flood consequences assessment, which is a document that we have as part of the application. Now, from memory, I'm going to say it doesn't tell us when that cut-off point is, because what we have to look at is something called the 1 in 200 year flood. So that's a flood of a size that, on average, you get one every 200 years. Now what Welsh Government have told us is development sites should be flood-free for the 1 in 200 year flood for the lifetime of a development, 75 years in this case because it's commercial. Now, we know it won't be, but from memory, I don't think the flood consequences assessment tells us when the cut-off date is. Because I know what you're driving at. You're saying, well, if it's year 70, are we that bothered? And the short answer is I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll check through the document now and see if I can come back on that, if that's okay.
Councillor
Can I just follow up very quickly? Or
yeah,
okay?
carry on, yeah.
Thanks. It's only a quick one, really. It's going back to the first question about the economic advantages and the effect of the store moving. I think you did partially answer this, but I just want to clarify again. In the initial assessments, you said you were looking at the effect of the store moving from its current site to the new site, but you'd already taken into account that something is going to move in there. Not necessarily the same sort of store, but something will move in. I'm just wondering, the point that Councillor Cochrane made, really, has that been taken into account where maybe smaller local businesses that were probably driven out by Aldi's originally because they couldn't compete with their prices are more likely to move back to that area and maybe reinvigorate that area? So your local butcher, your local grocer, that may now have more of a chance to repopulate that area if Aldi's do move to a slightly further afield venue?
The short answer to that is no. It's a bit of an imponderable. It's possible that if it's almost part of the gentrification process. We have seen it in some cities in the UK where, if you like, sort of traditional Victorian communities have seen that relative revival. But I think it's a bit of an Islington, North London thing, if you like. This is where you're going to get your high-end cheesemonger and delicatessen. Newport doesn't really function like that. My suspicion is we are unlikely to see that kind of revival, given the characteristics of the area and the available spend. Something like a shop at the petrol station might pick up trade. As you say, the pint of milk, loaf of bread type top-up shop that people do from time to time. But no one's assessed it. Don't really have any evidence either way on that.
Councillor Mogford.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Certainly can.
Good.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just put in, my colleague has helpfully found the relevant year. It's year 60. Yeah. So the site will be dry in the 1 in 200 year flood for 60 years. It wasn't in the flood consequences assessment. It was in a supplementary document, but 60 years.
Okay, Councillor Mogford, continue.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it's very important to listen to the ward councillors who have very good on-the-ground knowledge, and I thank the ward councillor for his presentation. My concern, I think, is around the flooding, and I'm down the queue here, so other people have asked the question. The officers said that it could be the case that the flood defences will have to be enhanced over time because the area is not going to be sacrificed to flooding. There's a lot of housing down there, And the other thing that often happens in these meetings is, we talk about the flood risks, and then we go ahead and approve the plans, even though the flood risks have been identified. I'm not sure how to formulate this into a question. I'm just a bit... I don't know how much weighting to put on the flooding, because it seems to me that things will get worse, but on the other hand, there's an obligation to enhance the flood defences. That's more of a comment, I guess. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to, it was only a comment, would you like to come back on that, sir?
Yeah, there is a brief section in the report on that. The applicant looks at the 7 estuary management strategy. I think that's the right name. The report will clear on that. And the stance in that document is hold the line. Now, when you read that as a layperson, you think, well, great, they'll upgrade the defence to maintain the current standard of protection, because surely what else can it be? But when you actually read the document, it says it doesn't mean that. And also it's a non-statutory plan. You don't have to do it. So one, they don't have to do it because it's not a statutory plan, and 2, hold the line doesn't actually mean hold the line. So the short answer is we now can have no confidence that NRW will raise that flood defence. We just don't know. But there's no plan in place which would bind them to do it. So we kind of have to take a worst case scenario and assume they won't.
Councillor Montford, do you want to come back?
Well, yeah, just to ask a clear question. This 1 in 200 year flooding event seems to be happening more and more regularly now. And I mean, I've seen more and more flooding in my ward and unprecedented events. How often are these 1 in 200 year events updated as we see things get worse?
The short answer to that is I don't know how often NRW update the flood model. They do update it to account for measurement and if you like finessing of their model and how it will work. But short answer is don't know. All we do know is that the projection is that the scale of the flood will become greater over time, because it's a tidal flood and therefore linked to sea level, which is in itself rising.
And sorry, Chair, if you could indulge me. So, how catastrophic would be a flood breach to a business? I.e., clearly there would be a lot of recovery work necessary, but would it mean that the business is out of action for a couple of weeks, a couple of days? And then business as usual for the next 200 years or whatever?
We don't envisage a flood defence failure, a breach, because the wall is new and it's been engineered to a high standard. So what the hydrologists who've advised on the planning application are saying is they envisage an overtopping event, i.e. the tide is so high it just comes over the top of a flood wall. Okay, so what that means then is the onset of flooding is very rapid. Okay, so literally the tide flows in across the top of the defence. The site will fill up with water basically immediately because it's next to the river. This is self-evident. And so the speed of inundation is extremely fast. And we know that the depths of it from a flood consequences assessment go beyond the safe levels which are set out in policy. Okay, so the conclusion is that if the site were to flood, it would be so dangerous that it would constitute danger for all. So even experienced and well-equipped persons in the rescue services would be at risk. The flood event would be significantly dangerous. The building is not going to be, it's not going to be raised up, so it will inundate, it will flood. So there is, risk to stock and so on and so forth. Because it's a tidal flood, it's predictable. So we would presume that any movable assets, vehicles, will be moved away, and that there won't be anyone there. This seems sensible because when it's going to happen, unlike say a river flood, which could happen any time. But nevertheless, national policy says you should direct development away from these areas because they flood, and this one we know will flood within the lifetime of a development after year 60, as we clarified, and we know it will flood to an intolerable level, i.e. a level that's unsafe and dangerous. So policy is very clear on this. We should be directing development away from such sites. And as we noted, we can't safely assume a flood defence will be raised. We have no confidence it will be. There's no requirement on NRW to do that, and they may not.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. I got a number of questions, but what happens to the original planning application from this developer? Would that still remain?
Yeah, but that's a good question. The permission is in place, okay, and we think it can be used. We're not completely sure it has been used yet, which is a slightly
They still have the opportunity to build the original store.
We think the planning permission is alive for a few more years. So even if they haven't used it, we think they could. However, the question is whether other authorities will allow them to use it, because the concern is that NRW wouldn't let them build it so close to their flood defence.
Okay. Going on to the flood defence, you say it's 1 in 200 years. If that overtops, 18% of Newport would be flooded anyway. And also, prior to this overtopping, this flooding, what is the situation on the opposite bank? Would that flood first?
Your comment's correct. In the event of an overtopping event, it's going to flood large areas of low-lying Newport. As I understand it, they have been doing work on the East Bank defence, but I honestly couldn't answer the question you've just asked, whether the Eastern Bank defences would fail before the Western ones. I simply don't know. I assume they're all built to the same standard, and therefore they would all fail at the same time, but I don't know.
Okay. The other thing, Chair, is what concerns me is you say that Aldi wants to redevelop this site because they've outgrown the other site, which I understand. We've done exactly the same with Sainsbury's on Malpas Road. When they outgrew their site, we allowed them to build this new site. So I think we're penalising this company by doing it, by refusing this application. The other thing is, it's a brownfield site, and as far as I can see, I don't have any issues in regards to any development going on other than housing. I do have an issue with that. The district centre, as you call it, I think it will, by Aldi's moving to this new site, it will benefit then, because there's a possibility, and other small organisations, food retailers, possibly could take over that site as well, unless there's a restriction put on it. The other thing is, if we refuse this and the original application goes through, you won't have area enough to have the cycleway at the back, would you?
Right, sorry, Councillor, there's quite a few points there. In terms of the applicant, we're obviously blind to who that is. So this is not prejudicial to anyone. We've simply applied the retail policy as we would to any applicant. I can't really comment on the Sainsbury's decision. That is some years ago now, but clearly at the time, I suspect they would have demonstrated need, and therefore their proposal would have been policy compliant, and it would have been reasonable to approve it. But again, that's assumptions, because I don't know enough about that individual case to comment particularly on it. In terms of the land, it is brownfield. It's previously developed. We don't dispute that. It very obviously is previously developed land. It's not derelict, though. We think it still has economic purpose. All right, that's been reduced by the demolition of the building because they've lost that storage facility, but clearly it can still operate as a truck park, which is effectively what it always was. There's nothing to stop that use, well, happening now, today. You know, they can drive onto it any time they want. So in planning terms, it isn't a useless site. So this is why we have to balance out those regeneration benefits, because it's not a piece of derelict land. It's actually got an economic use, potentially a valuable one. So we accept that the Aldi store will have economic benefits, but we're not sure it outweighs the economic benefits of the site as it currently stands. But that's a judgment. And of course, people can disagree with us on that. That's fine. You know, that's perfectly reasonable in any planning assessment. The active travel point, as I say, the existing active travel route won't be affected by I've stopped sharing it. Anyway, never mind. The existing active travel route will not be affected by this proposal. We're happy about that. So we're not concerned about that at all. So what we have, we hold. We agree that the way that they've set the site out gives the potential for public access, but it doesn't guarantee it because it's still private land, if that makes sense. And I don't really know how these active travel routes are legally instituted. It's a question I can't answer.
Chair, I've got two more. One is about the active travel route. I can understand the active travel route at the rear of the building, or the development, if you had, or if the active travel route continued up north and were coming from the south. But no, you're going off an active travel route, going round a U-shape, and I don't think people are going to do that in an active travel. The other thing, only one other thing, and that is the parking spaces. You've got 113 parking spaces, I believe. What is the number of parking spaces on the original application?
It was slightly fewer. I think it was 105, maybe 106. It was slightly less. But parking wasn't an issue on that one, and it's not on this either. There's sufficient parking to serve the needs of the proposal. We're happy about that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Howell.
Thanks, Chair. A few points which have been sort of similarly raised by colleagues. This is a less vulnerable development, I guess, in terms of being retail as opposed to residential. It goes back to that sort of question on weight, really, in terms of the sort of guidance. You wouldn't allow a residential development on here, but less vulnerable developments might be more acceptable because it's retail. There's reference in the sort of NRW response in the report at sort of paragraph 4.2 of the report, which is fairly lengthy, to a year of 2097 several times. I don't know if that's the year that it's intended to flood that you were talking about earlier, or is that some sort of formula that gets us to that year? So just some clarification on that, and sort of understanding to sort of get the difference, because that's 74 years' time.
Yeah,
it's
the 75-year lifetime of a development that they're working to. Okay, so what we're advised is when you carry out development in a flood risk area, you have to consider the lifetime of a proposal. Now, for a commercial development, that's 75 years, which is quite probably right. You know, by then a building probably will be getting towards its end of use. Housing, it's 100. I'd like to think a house would last a bit longer than that, but nevertheless, that's how it's set in policy. So yeah, that's all it is. That's an acknowledgement of that 75-year point.
Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chair. Just working. First of all, I'd like to thank Geraint and all the officers for such a compact report and setting out how they arrived at their conclusion for the refusal. Also, I'd like to thank Paul and the ward members for their contribution to what they agree with or disagree with the appeal. What I'd like to say is that why hasn't the developer come back with any proposals to contradict the objections from the NRW ground contamination sites. They've been given ample opportunity to write back and provide further evidence which has been asked of them, but they haven't actually done that. Also, by us going against the officers, we could also be going against our retail policies as well as that we've set out ourselves. So that's all I've got to say on the matter at the minute, and I'll be reserving my right to vote in a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. Just, I think there's just general agreement on the flooding issue. No one's disputing the facts of it. Okay, so they're not saying it won't flood. They're saying, yeah, it will, but there are benefits to the proposal that outweigh that. But it's not up for debate. Everyone accepts this site will flood. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to comment on R.J. Mason's lorry park usage for that area. He has relocated and opened a new premises on the east side of Newport, down Lee Way. Going back to the premises as they are at the moment, it used to be a transport company, Wins Transport, then R.J. Mason's. It's been done for storage and such, but a brownfield site like that is what we're going to attract there otherwise. And whatever we attract there, it's going to have the same issues as what we've got with Aldi's now with flooding. So we seem to be going around a little bit of a circle here. Somebody else goes there. Whatever else we put there, we'll have similar problems, I would envisage. So just like that, add that comment, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in summary, there's national and local policies that seek to focus retail uses into existing retail developments within the retail hierarchy. So that's the national and local policy position on this. That's the starting point in terms of one of the policies. Other policies in the LDP, as you say, in terms of the reasons for refusal, seek to retain employment land purely. Those are the traditional industrial uses for industrial sites such as this. So when making any decision, we follow the plan-led decision-making and look at what the plan says. So this is why officers are saying the proposals are unacceptable. When you look at it in the round, when you look at the evidence that's been provided, the proposals don't meet that evidence. They're not acceptable in policy terms, both in flooding, in terms of retail need, in terms of the retail hierarchy, in terms of the loss of the employment land. So there's several reasons for a refusal on this, and they're not given lightly from our perspective. Evidence has been provided in terms of the quantitative need for the development, and there's nothing to say, there's no additional need for that. So we can't say that if this goes elsewhere, something will fit back into the existing district centre and that will be replaced. We can't say that with any certainty. What we can say is that there's no need has been identified for this proposal, firstly in terms of quantitative need, but also in terms of qualitative need. We don't think it stacks up. So this is why, as officers, there's several policy objections. It is a vacant parcel of land, but we don't think this is the right location for this development on this site. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if it's permissible, but listening to, obviously, the statement read out earlier on, they said that if they go to the new premises, there was already somebody coming into the empty vacancy premises they're leaving behind. They said there was already somebody on the table. So it's a new development. I know the arguments for, but I want to say it is exciting to have new development, expansion, and it's shiny. It's going next to Sainsbury's. It's a hub, shopping hub already starting to exist down there. And we're also getting somebody else to go into the old premises. So from an employment, commercial point of view, it's a positive. However, I understand all the other arguments as well.
Okay, thank you. Have we finished now? Okay, thank you. Okay, the recommendation by the officers is to be refused. Do I have anybody that supports that and propose it, please? Yes? Okay, anyone second? Okay. So we have I second that then, and counted. So I will. We would now go to the vote. All those in favour of the refusal, please show their hands. And those against? Okay, so that's defeated. So we now have to have a proposal for... Oh, they have to put a proposal forward. Could somebody then please put a new proposal forward?
Yeah, Chair, I propose that we refuse the offer's recommendation and to grant the applicant, I think with the condition that the applicant actually sticks to this new application and with the layout of the store.
Okay, do we have a second for that? Just give it, oh sorry, why is refused? He just said. Yeah. Okay, so Councillor Jordan has put a proposal through against the refusal and with some recommendations, yes, and is seconded by Councillor Watkins. Could all those in favour of this proposal?
So the recommendation, Chair, I got is then that this application comes from now will be for the new application with the new store as it's been provided today with us.
Okay. Is that okay? Yeah. Right, all those in favour of the new proposal? And those against? Any abstentions? No, so that new proposal has been passed. Okay. Okay. I'd like to thank you all for your comments and questions and presentations.
Chair, Councillor Mogford here.
Councillor Mogford.
Just to say, as I'm dialing in remotely, I couldn't see the votes. Right. And that's just an observation. It would have been nice to see who voted which way. But I take your word for it.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Mogford.
Sorry, Chair. In terms of the decision, if members are voting to approve, just to be clear, we will need conditions to be added to this decision. So we haven't got any before us at the moment. We're going to need to consider what conditions are appropriate. So, to my mind, there are two options available to committee. Firstly, either we will bring a report back next committee with a recommendation for approval with your conditions on to consider. Or secondly, you could give myself delegated powers to issue the decision with the conditions that I see fit. It's up to members.
I am quite happy if we have to put conditions on that Andrew is to look at this, and I trust him that he'll put the correct conditions in. Are anybody happy with that? Yeah?
Is this delegated, Chair? So we're delegating the decisions, or will it come back for a vote?
I prefer to come back to the next planning committee to vote on those restrictions.
So are you all in favour of that? This conditions are put on, then it's come back?
So the resolution at the present time is to defer the application for officers to consider conditions and a recommendation for approval to come back to the next committee.
I'm happy with that, Chair, but what happens if those conditions don't meet with the planning committee's conditions that we were discussing? Would that be the end of it? Because this is it will be the third time it comes back to planning committee.
Councillor Evans?
Could I perhaps suggest a third way to approach this is that we delegate authority to Andrew and his team to come up with some conditions, and if the applicant isn't content to agree them, that it then comes back to the committee for consideration. It's that third option, because if the two parties can agree them between themselves and are both content on them, I see no reason for the committee to reconsider that.
Okay, are people happy with the third recommendation?
I'm happy with that, Chair, if we do that. Yeah.
Okay, so we go for the third recommendation. You happy with
So we've got delegated authority to approve the application subject to conditions, subject to agreement from the applicant, and if they disagree, it'll come back to committee for decision. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, just a very quick point. I did prepare this slide. Because the site is next to the river, and we've explained it's a special area of conservation, which is a very high level of protection, we have to undertake something called an appropriate assessment, sometimes known as a habitat regulations assessment. And this slide just explains what we have to do, which is basically we've got to consult NRW on the decision. And now, on a refusal, it didn't matter, because had we refused it, then there would have been no impact on the river because nothing was changing. But because we're granting it, then things change. So what we will need to do is give the condition schedule, which you've been discussing, to NRW for their approval, effectively. Well, no, that's not quite right. For their consideration, they have to look at that. And they have to be content that the conditions which we as an authority are imposing will protect the interests of the river. Okay, so there is a third-party interest as well. It isn't just between us and the applicant. There is this third-party RW who do need to have some input on this to make sure that the decision is completely robust. So you're satisfied that not only will we share the condition schedule with the applicant, we'll also share it with NRW and take their views on board. Are we all content? Yes?
Councillor Jones? Sorry, Councillor Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you just demonstrate to us what timeline we're looking at? Because obviously everybody's keen to move this on now. It's been going on for a long time, these planning applications. So is there a timeline that we could be expecting?
The condition schedule might need a little bit of tweaking, but we'll probably have done that by the end of today because, of course, there's a set we did earlier in 2020. So that won't take long. We will obviously provide that to the applicant's agent as soon as we have it, and we'll forward it to NRW, who will need also to see it, just to confirm that they're satisfied that the conditions do what we think they will do. And then that should round it all out, and we'll be in a position then, hopefully, to issue the decision. So effectively, it wouldn't come back to you then. You wouldn't see it. You would leave it to us and the applicant and NRW to hammer it into shape and get a decision out.
So just follow on that the timeline then. So NRW, obviously, we got open communication, so we're not talking months and months of just lost in timeline.
No, they should be able to come back quite quickly. We know an officer has considered this point very recently, in fact, yesterday, because they sent something to us, but it wasn't anything we needed to trouble you with. In the event you refused the application, but it is something we need to trouble you with now because obviously the council's made a decision to grant it. But the bottom line is there is an NRW officer whose head is in the game, for want of a better phrase, and should be able to deal with it promptly.
Thanks, Chair. It's just really expanding slightly on Councillor Jones's point about the timeline. Just to make sure I've completely understood this properly now, if you and your team come up with a set of conditions which are agreed between yourselves and the applicant and then RW, which you say can happen reasonably quickly, if there's any issue with that agreement between the three parties, it will then come back to Planning Committee. With that timeline, would that be ready to come back to us at the next Planning Committee?
I'd be hopeful it would. Now, obviously, we're in the hands of other people, but I don't see any obvious impediment to it happening quite quickly.
Right, so if the three parties agree, it goes through, that's great. If not, then it'll all be ready to be discussed at the next Planning Committee. It won't drag on any further than that.
I wouldn't think so.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sure the applicant will be very keen to have a decision on this.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we're now happy to move on with that one, yes? Okay, thank you. And thank you, sir. We're now going to move on to item number 2. I'm sorry, I'm looking a bit confused because there was a speaker here, the ward speaker here, is it? Is he still here? Ah, is he? Okay. Right. Thanks. Yeah, so item number 2 is application number 220756, the Ferns Club. And this is going to be presented by Brad Dawkins.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I appreciate we've obviously had a long discussion this morning regarding the previous application, so I will try and cover the key points throughout my presentation as reasonably quickly as I can, but obviously making sure there's sufficient information provided. And then perhaps if there's any questions or topics for discussion, we can come to at the end of the presentation. So this application is for the demolition of the public house and construction of 12 affordable apartments and 8 affordable houses, together with associated car parking and amenity areas at the Ferns Club on Liswary Road in the Liswary ward. The officer's recommendation is that the application is granted with conditions subject to the Section 106 legal agreement being signed, with delegated powers to refuse the application in the event that the agreement is not signed within 3 months of the decision. So the site is outlined in red here. It's to the north of Liswary Road and is approximately 0.3 hectares in size. It is currently a vacant 2-storey public house and social club with large flat roof single-storey rear extension and associated grounds. It has been closed since June 2020. The site has been subject to vandalism, criminal damage and antisocial behaviour since its closure and is currently in a poor condition. A number of windows are boarded up. It's surrounded by sort of fencing and boarding and has been subject to fly tipping and littering. So in terms of the existing land uses around the site, to the west of the site, as my cursor is showing here, is the existing residential development of Fernside. So that's under the control of Mellin Homes, the housing association. They would be the end user if permission is forthcoming for the proposed development before you today. To the north, we've got residential uses. To the east, we've got a private lane, Laburnum Lane, which provides access to further residential properties. And to the south, on the opposite side of Liswary Road, we have further residential properties again. So the general context of the area is predominantly residential. So there's just a few slides here showing some photographs that I've taken from sites. So the first one in the top left-hand corner is taken from Liswary Road looking north along what would be the proposed access road to the site. You can see in the background residential properties of Fernside and also the existing public house to the right-hand side there. The second photo on the right-hand side is taken from the western boundary of the site looking at that residential development at Fernside, the parking area and the 2.5 and 2-storey properties there. The third photograph is taken from the front boundary of the proposed site, looking west along Liswary Road, and the fourth looking east along Liswary Road. So the top left-hand photo on marked number 5 here is taken from the southern boundary of the site, looking north towards the northern boundary of the site. Number 6 is just an indication of some of the fly tipping and littering that's taken place at the site. Number 7 is the eastern boundary of the site, which you can see is vegetated and there's existing trees. That bounds with that private lane that I talked about on Laburnum Lane. And then photograph 8 is the western boundary of the site shared with Fernside, which is currently enclosed by close boarded fencing. And again, an indication of the boarded up windows and fly tipping and littering that has taken place at site. So in terms of the site plan, we'll touch upon this in a little bit more detail as we go through, but broadly speaking, we've got a terrace block of 5 2-bedroom houses here, facing outwards onto Liswary Road, set behind a grass landscaped area, private front gardens. We've got a terrace of 3 3-bedroom properties, known as Block B here, which overlook a parking court. Then we've got blocks C and D, which both 3-storey buildings containing 6 1-bedroom flats, again overlooking the parking court and communal open space. There's existing and proposed vegetation around the boundaries of the site, and proposed landscaping measures such as tree planting and grass and rain gardens throughout the internal layout of the site. There are 23 parking spaces, refuse store and cycle store for the flats, and private cycle sheds for the individual dwelling houses. So the key considerations have been set out in the officer's report, and are bullet pointed there. I won't run through each of them on that slide, but I'll touch upon them as we go through the presentation. Obviously, these are looked at and discussed in much further detail within the officer's report, but they're the key sort of topics and considerations that we've looked at when making an assessment of the application. So in terms of the principle of development and establishing that, it's reuse of previously developed land within the urban boundary and within a sustainable location. So it is compliant with Policy SP1, which is the overarching strategic policy of the local development plan for sustainability. We will be losing a loss of community facility, the Public House and Social Club, as that will be demolished to make way for the proposed development. So therefore, Policy CF12 is relevant to the application. It's been closed since June 2020. The reasons for that, a mix of reasons ranging from sort of COVID-19 restrictions and the general issues faced by the public house industry across the UK. Marketing has been undertaken and a new operator has been sought, and there's been no solid interest to be used as a public house. And this has been confirmed by the submission of a property surveyor's report, which was included within the submission of the application. It's also been demonstrated in the application that there is alternate provision in the local area for similar uses that would continue to provide a service and facilities for the local community. Therefore, it's considered that the proposal is compliant with Policy CF12 of the Local Development Plan. Moving on to flood risk, the site is located within Flood Zone C1, and it is highly vulnerable development in flood risk terms, as it is residential. Therefore, a flood consequence assessment has been submitted with the application, and it has been reviewed by the local authority and also by Natural Resources Wales. So the assessment, which is contained within the officer's report, has been taken in accordance with Technical Advice Note 15, and the predicted flood events do not exceed the tolerable limits as set out in that advice note and are considered to be acceptable. Natural Resources Wales have also confirmed there no objection to the application in flood risk terms. It is therefore considered that the proposal is compliant with Policy SP3 of the Local Development Plan. So, if we move on to the assessment of the design layout and residential amenity of the scheme, good design is set out in Planning Policy Wales, and we've got the objectives of good design outlined here in this diagram. Planning Policy Wales also looks at placemaking at the heart of development and requires proposals to contribute to the concept of placemaking, which is a holistic approach to the planning and design and development of spaces focused on positive outcomes. Placemaking draws up on an area's potential to create high-quality development of public spaces that promotes people, prosperity, health, happiness and well-being. Good placemaking should consider the context, function and relationships between a development site and its wider surroundings. So in terms of the proposed site, as you can see here, in terms of its density, this is in accordance with Policy 2 of the Future Wales National Plan, which requires in urban areas a minimum density of 50 dwellings per hectare. This is in excess of that. The scheme has been designed so that there is active frontage along Liswerry Road here. The main elevations of these dwelling houses overlooking Liswerry Road, which is a continuation of the building pattern and building form along Liswerry Road, helping to integrate the proposal with the surrounding area. Blocks B, C and D all face inwards into the parking area and communal space, which provides natural surveillance and positives in terms of security for the site. High quality boundary treatments have been proposed in publicly visible areas. So, for example, on the western boundary of the site and the rear of these properties, this is a 1.8 metre brick screen wall. Typically with residential properties, you'll see close boarded fences, but this isn't seen as being a high quality boundary treatment which contributes towards placemaking objectives, whereas a wall is a higher quality treatment. There's tree planting along boundaries of the boundary of the site and within the the main footprint of the site within the parking courts to split the two parking courts and to soften the visual impact of a large area of parking. It's also proposed that the parking area will be of a paved surface as opposed to tarmac or asphalt, again, to break up sort of the visual appearance of the site. You know, Fernside adjacent is all tarmac and is quite a vast area of hard surface, but with the landscaping and mix of materials, which will be controlled by a condition, officers are satisfied with the visual impact. All buildings along the front of the site and within the site and the blocks of flats contain defensible spaces to the building's frontage, communal areas of open space for residents to use, and also it is proposed to widen the existing footway which runs along the west of the site onto Liswary Road. It's currently substandard and would be widened to 2 metres in width. So there were highways improvements as part of the proposal. It's considered that the site is located in a good location with good linkage to the surrounding area. In terms of looking at the design of the proposed elevations, at the top of the slide here we've got Block A, which is the block of terrace properties that front Liswary Road, and then Block B, which front the parking court. These are of a scale that is in keeping with those existing properties along Liswary Road and of similar appearance to those at Fernside. Materials include face and brick and render, which are consistent with the area, and architectural detail include brick sills and soldier courses to openings, with canopies above doors that add interest to these elevations. The dwellings are designed to take advantage of solar gain by including solar panels on front roof planes, which again enhances the sustainability credentials of the site. Moving to the flatter buildings, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, these are broadly in line with the existing residential properties that you can see on that streetscape image at Fernside. They're 3 stories, so are of a larger scale than the 2-storey dwellings that are proposed as part of this scheme, but they are at the rear of the site, so visually they're considered to be less imposing. They're adjacent to the 2.5-storey terrace at Fernside, which has a more vertically emphasised fenestration, and this helps to visually align the proposed buildings. The flatted buildings have been separated into 2 blocks to limit their appearance rather than one large block, and each block is sufficiently detailed with Juliet balconies with glazed front, a mix of materials and features such as the roof gables, as you can see, to create interest and break up the elevation. It has been negotiated and agreed through the course of the application that the openings on the front elevations of the apartment blocks will have a reveal depth of 110mm, which is deeper than standard, in order to provide further relief to the facade. Materials are considered to be in keeping with the proposed dwellings. So moving on to the residential amenity, this is considered in quite some detail in the officer's report, so I've sort of just summarised the key considerations in this slide. In terms of the proposed dwellings, they're of a suitable size and layout. They're adequately served by windows which provide suitable light and outlook for residents. The garden spaces are suitably laid out and designed, and they offer adequate privacy for users. An acoustic assessment has been submitted and raised no issues in terms of meeting the required internal noise levels for future amenity of residents. Turning to the flats, they're compliant with the SPG in terms of the internal space standards for one-bedroom flats. The layout is satisfactory. The main living areas are laid out to the front of the property to benefit from the south-facing elevation in terms of solar gain, adequate light and outlook, and they're provided to be adequate in terms of providing suitable amenity for residents. There is communal outdoor space compliant with the requirements of the SPG in terms of size standards, located to the front of Block D and to the rears of Block C and D. No private balconies are proposed. There's concerns regarding potential overlooking of neighbouring properties if there's external raised outdoor areas, and also the Housing Association have experienced sort of misuse of these outdoor balcony areas in their experience. They have been omitted from the scheme. In terms of neighbouring residential amenity, there's sufficient, generally speaking, there's sufficient distances, separation distances proposed to protect the privacy, natural light and amenity of neighbouring properties to the north, east and west. There's no issues in relation of overbearing impact from the buildings. Sufficient boundary treatments and landscaping is proposed along boundaries to protect the amenity. and existing landscape features and buildings outside of the site also contribute to the screening of the site. So these are typical floor plans for the two sets of residential dwellings. So on the left-hand side, we've got the ground floor and first floor layout of the two-bedroom properties. As you can see, the sort of the living area and living room and kitchen, and the dining area and toilet are set out at ground floor, with 2 bedrooms and bathroom at first floor. And then in terms of the 3 beds, a very similar layout at ground floor, with 3 bedrooms and bathroom at first floor. In terms of the 1-bed flat layouts, this is a typical ground floor layout. All 3 stories have the same layout, so they're accessed centrally by a central access point, and they've got living and dining space and kitchen in a large open plan format to the front of the property, with large vertical opening by way of Juliet balcony to the front, and bedrooms and toilet facility to the rear. So moving on to sustainable travel and highway safety and parking. In accordance with Planning Policy Wales, new development should prioritise walking, cycling and public transport ahead of private motor vehicles. The sustainable transport hierarchy also acknowledges the importance of the role of ultra-low emission vehicles in the decarbonisation of transport. So in terms of how the site has addressed that hierarchy, as previously mentioned, there's highways improvements proposed, and they'll be controlled via condition, to widen the existing footway along the western boundary of the site to meet Liswerry Road to 2 metres. This will, A, provide pedestrian safety, so a more likelihood of pedestrians using it, and also help encourage active travel to and from the site. There's secure storage of cycles for the flats and houses, which is compliant with the SPG standards and would encourage people to cycle to and from the site. There's good accessibility to bus stops within walking distance of the site. And also there's infrastructure provided on the plans for the electric vehicle charging points for parking courts. And again, this infrastructure is controlled by a planning condition. In terms of highway safety, the existing access is utilised, and this is acceptable off Liswerry Road. Swept path analysis has been provided for refuse vehicle tracking, and this is confirmed as being acceptable. There's no objections from the highways officer in terms of highway safety. In terms of parking, this slide outlines parking provision at the site. So, on site, it is proposed to provide 23 parking spaces, which, when considering the sustainability credentials of the site, and a sustainability survey has been undertaken and submitted for consideration, it would allow a reduction of 8 spaces in total for the site. Therefore, the 23 spaces provided is in accordance with the SPG after that sustainability appraisal is applied. There are 4 visitor spaces that are generated in accordance with the SPG as a result of the number of units, and these cannot be accommodated on site as there is no room. However, a parking survey has been submitted, and it is demonstrated that within the survey area, these 4 spaces for visitors can be accommodated without resulting in an adverse impact on highway safety. The Council's highways officer has again not objected to parking. So in terms of ecology, a survey was taken of the existing building, and it did find that the existing building is a day roost for bats. Now, bats are European protected species. Natural Resources of Wales have therefore been consulted, and they have advised that a European protected species licence will be required to mitigate the impact of the demolition of the building on bats. The Council's in-house ecologist has accepted the no objection from NRW, and that they would be likely to grant a European protected species licence. The ecologist has requested a condition to secure that the ecological mitigation and enhancement that is recommended in that survey is controlled via condition to ensure that there is no adverse impact and an actual benefit to matters of biodiversity at the site. The tree survey that has been undertaken has indicated that a number of trees around the periphery of the site are in poor condition and in ill health. There is a proposed and would therefore need to be removed. There is a proposed scheme of landscaping which includes new tree planting along the boundaries of the site and also within the site. The soft landscape scheme also provides sufficient planting to mitigate visual impact of the development and contributes to placemaking objectives. The landscape officer has raised some amendments to the scheme of landscaping specifically relating to the proposed species and additional planting along the northern boundary to improve the green corridor. It is recommended that these details are controlled via condition. Several tree-related conditions are also recommended as part of the conditional regime to protect the existing trees on site during construction of development. So the application is for 100% affordable housing, so it's therefore exempt from any commuted sum contributions towards leisure provision and education provision. However, it is required that a Section 106 legal agreement is signed prior to the issuing of the decision notice. So the legal agreement will secure 20% affordable housing in line with the policy requirement for this area. So for this area, as set out in LDP policy, we can only secure 20% affordable housing via the legal agreement. That's not to say that the housing association will not provide 100%, but we can only secure due to the policy, 20%. So therefore, the legal agreement will safeguard the council's position in the event that any unit is sold or rented on the open market, and there's a formula that has been provided and will be contained within that legal agreement, which would calculate the education and leisure financial obligations that would be required in the event that any property does go on the open market. So the draft heads of terms have been agreed by the applicant. Some other matters that have been raised during the public consultation of this application relate to residents and local councillor concerns with regards to antisocial behaviour and the fear of crime. So it is understood that there is an existing issue within the ward and the local area in terms of antisocial behaviour and crime. These are currently issues at the site, and it's thought that the redevelopment of the site, an empty building which is subject to break-ins and damage and fly tipping and littering, the redevelopment of that to a sustainable land use is considered as contributing to combat part of this issue within the ward. No objections have been received by Gwent Police, although they were consulted. The site will be occupied by a registered social landlord who will have an obligation to manage it accordingly. In order for plan of permissions to be robustly refused on these grounds, i.e. fear of crime and antisocial behaviour, it would need to be demonstrated that the proposal would result in a material adverse impact. There is no evidence presented that would confirm this. A number of representations made from neighbours and also in discussions with local councillors has requested that the one-bedroom units in particular are allocated for people over the age of 55. This is seen to sort of potentially mitigate or overcome some of those antisocial behaviours issues and issues of crime which are prevalent within the area. Now, the local planning authority must only consider acceptability of land use, and the demographic of future occupiers, i.e. their age and status, is not a material planning consideration. Occupancy will be based on the needs of those on the housing waiting list, and their age or status may be relevant to separate bodies, but it cannot be considered within the planning application. The Council's Housing Development Officer has been consulted as part of the scheme, and they've offered their support, showing that there is a need for this proposed development within this area. So overall, just to sort of summarise, the proposal would result in a sustainable reuse of previously developed land, which is currently having a negative visual impact on the surrounding area and suffers from fly tip and antisocial behaviour. The scheme would provide much needed 100% affordable housing. It's compliant with the, in flood risk terms against TAN 15, it is compliant. And the acceptable layout and design would provide satisfactory level of amenity for future occupiers of the site, as well as existing neighbouring residential properties. Highways improvements are proposed as part of the scheme, which are a merit, and there's opportunity for ecological enhancement, soft landscaping and planting. The scheme is considered to achieve good placemaking objectives. So, just to reiterate, the officer's recommendation is that the application is granted with conditions, subject to the signing of the Section 106 legal agreement, with delegated powers to refuse the application in the event that that legal agreement is not signed within 3 months of this decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grant. We do have a ward councillor who would like to speak on this application. Councillor Patterson. I am aware it's your first time, so please take your time and there's no rush, okay?
Okay, thank you, Chair and Committee. Yeah, I'd like this proposal refused, as a lot of the residents around there refers to 55-year-olds and above, and it can be refused on that ground. But I think the residents would create a compromise with the proposals of the 3-storey flats, which ain't in keeping with the area because it's surrounded by bungalows and 2-storey buildings. So I believe the residents would be unreasonable with like allocating the antisocial behaviour, which normally comes with social housing. I think is a different energy. I spent the majority of my life on council estates, and now I live on a private estate, and it's definitely a different energy, which I would think is like some of my past behaviours, which were acceptable on a council estate, is not acceptable in a private estate. And I think the residents of Lisway Road mainly will see the energy which comes from a lot of the younger people who would utilise the 1-bedroom flats and 2 bedrooms as antisocial, where they're coming and going throughout the day and night. So I think if it can be refused on the grounds of the 55s and over, I think just as having the 3-storey buildings overlooking the gardens and being not suitable to the area, it should be refused on that ground. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patson. So the presentation has been made and Councillor Patson has made his comments. Anybody have any questions? Councillor Linton.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the 3-storey flats, will they be overlooking any windows overlooking the rear gardens or gardens surrounding that site?
So, if I try and best way to try and show this, bear with me 2 seconds. Here we go. Show this aerial image. So, as you can see, the site is outlined in red. The 2 3-storey blocks will be broadly adjacent to the existing 2.5-storey terrace at Fernside. So, just to give you an indication in terms of positioning on this aerial view. To the rear of the site, well, within the site and the other side, so outside of the control of the applicant, there are a number of trees, and outside of the site there is a large outbuilding which is contained within what appears to be the residential curtilage of this property here. I think it's possibly 67 Lisway Road. There's a distance of approximately 50 metres from the side elevation of that house to the boundary along here. So they've got a very large area. Now, in terms of the layout of the site, blocks C and D have been arranged so that the primary living areas are contained at the front. So your living rooms, kitchens, sort of open space, livable areas, most habited by occupants, contained at the front. So at the rear, there would be, each flat would have a bedroom and a toilet, bathroom, sorry. So those would be possible openings that may have views towards the rear boundary of the site. Now, the distances, as we've set out in the officer's report, we've obviously gone into this in much further detail in terms of the assessment, but in short, it's considered that the distance to the boundary, combined with landscaping features that are existing, and also the condition that's been recommended in terms of further screening that northern boundary from soft planting, and the existing outbuildings. I mean, you can see one outlined in red here, which is a large outbuilding that runs within third-party land, are considered to provide adequate amenity for the neighbouring properties to the north, and it's not considered that we can demonstrate any harm in terms of sort of overlooking or lack of privacy from those buildings.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased that we're getting 100% affordability houses, because we're in desperate need for rehousing people in Newport area. So,
Councillor Reynolds.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was going to comment as well on the 100% social housing. I mean, it is desperately needed, and I think it's just to see that sort of development is a massive positive. I don't think there's any doubt that that area, since the Ferns has been closed, you know, it has been a magnet for fly tipping, and the photographs showed that. But you know, anyone who goes around that area knows it's been a magnet for fly tipping, for antisocial behaviour, and you know. I think the positives of this sort of development, while I completely understand the councillor's point, I do understand what you're saying. I think the positives massively outweigh any possible negatives. When you're talking about 100% social housing, the landscaping features that will obviously enhance the area. I would like to think that in terms of maybe over 55s and who moves into those areas, that the housing developer, the housing association responsible for them will take that into consideration, and maybe that's where the representation could come, you know, to them at that point. But I do think the positives here massively outweigh any potential negatives.
Councillor Howell.
Thanks, Chair. Two comments really about 100% affordable housing. I don't think that's a given. We can only secure 20% affordable housing, was the comment from Grant. The Housing Association don't own the property, so there's no guarantee that we'll get 100% affordable housing. We can't secure that. We can only secure 20%. So I think we need to be careful on that assumption. There is a land sale agreement to the project managers, but not to the Housing Association. So having searched the land registry records, Toyn Construction currently own the property, and they've got a sale agreement in place with the applicant who's making this application today, who I presume in turn may flip the property onto the Housing Association once consent has been granted, but there's no guarantee, I guess, and we haven't seen any conditional sale register with the land registry on that basis as of my search this morning. Point in relation to secure cycle storage, plot 7 to me doesn't meet the SPG because there's no rear access to secure cycle storage in the sheds that are at the back. There's no access that I can see on the plan that goes around to the back of the property that means that that cycle storage isn't adequate, and there isn't sufficient provision in there. So in terms of the SPG, I would argue that the plans don't meet that. I echo the comments from Councillor Peterson around the density of the 3-storey properties at the rear of the development, which I don't think from the diagram which Grant presented in terms of the elevations, proposed elevations, are in keeping there. And certainly at the back of the property there are quite small old cottages, which I think are actually called Laburnum cottages, which will be significantly impacted in terms of the character and detriment by a 3-storey property going in front of them. Grant also made the point that we can't insist that the properties are allocated to over 55s as part of a planning condition, but my submission would be that that could be secured as part of the Section 106 agreement, and in fact, you know, we could say that the tenure of the properties are secured by over 55s accommodation, which is commonplace in developments across Newport and beyond in terms of both the tenure and where they're at. And that is sort of my questions and submissions, if I can, Chair.
Grant?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably defer in terms of the legal agreement and the sort of demographic of future occupants. I would probably defer that to the legal representative just to clarify that point. But in terms of the other points, sort of, I mean, the assessment sort of been set out in the report in terms of we've looked at the neighbouring properties and not, you know, sort of assessed the potential for impact on those. We've looked at separation distances, light tests, for example, location of window openings and things like that, and have come to the conclusion that they wouldn't be an adverse harmful impact on the residential amenity of surrounding properties. Notwithstanding, there would be a different relationship, because obviously at the minute there's a 2-storey building with extension to the front, and obviously this would result in more built form of development within the site. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's harmful, and obviously we've come to the conclusion, having undertaken a thorough assessment, that it wouldn't be harmful. So that's sort of my response to that. But yeah, if I could possibly defer to legal with regards to the over 55s and the legal agreement query.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the legal agreement, we've got to have a Section 106 agreement has to meet legal tests in terms of they're set out in the SIL regulations. This wouldn't. There's no planning requirement for these to be over 55s in this case, so there'd be no justification to ensure that they are, and we couldn't. It wouldn't comply with policy, it wouldn't meet the SIL tests for a Section 106 agreement, so we couldn't secure that via Section 106 agreement.
I didn't get a response on the point about the secure parking provision, cycle provision for Plot 7 and the rear access.
Apologies, Councillor. So Plot 7 is the middle property of the terrace of 3, which you can see at Plot B. So yeah, you're quite right. There isn't an external access point for that shed, which would provide the secure storage. I don't believe the SPG states that there has to be a separate external access point for that. I mean, obviously it would be easier for the resident if they didn't have to take a bike through the house. But I think that would be what they'd have to do in this instance. Obviously, I don't have the SPG in front of me, but I think that by providing a secure shed within the curtilage of the property, then this would meet the requirements of the SPG.
The SPG is silent on the point of whether access needs to be provided. It does refer to the words adequate, and in my submission that isn't an adequate cycle provision for the property. It would be reasonably difficult to access, and a reluctance generally from households to bring bikes through the house and onto carpets and causing damage in properties through the mud and all the rest of it. So.
Okay, point taken. Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a quick one. With the S106, is there any money going towards local schools and things like that as well? And also, what is the heights of the flats and compared to the houses?
Right, so in terms of the Section 106, because the proposal as submitted is for 100% affordable housing, there's no requirement for education or leisure provision. However, the Section 106 does safeguard that. So if the Section 106 will secure that 20% is affordable housing, that's all we can secure via the policy. But what it does secure is a formula. So if one flat or a house or several went on the open market in terms of rental or to be sold in the open market, that would trigger the requirement for an educational or leisure provision to be made at that time. So there's a formula built in, and that will be tied to the legal agreement, that if any unit over 20% does go into sort of private form, then there will be a contribution required. Can't really give a figure on that point because you don't know how many units there might be that would go in, so it's a bit difficult to say it will be X amount, but there is a formula in place as part of the SPG for affordable housing and planning contributions which looks at that. In terms of your query regarding building heights, I'll check my report. So the proposed terraced buildings will have a maximum height of 7.8 metres. So the dwellings will be 7.8. And the two flats will be 11 metres, a maximum height of 11 metres. The adjacent block at Fernside is somewhere between those two figures. I think I may have the height of that, just to give you an idea in terms of the adjacent existing building. Perhaps I don't. So I'm not sure. I thought I'd included it within the report, but no, just the heights. I was going to try and give a figure compared to the adjacent residential properties, which are 2.5 stories, so they're a little bit greater in scale. But I suppose I can go back to the plan at the bottom. Sorry, there we go. So the bottom slide, the bottom of the slide here. So these are the adjacent properties at Fernside. So the existing properties, and these are the proposed apartment buildings.
Okay, anything else, Councillor Jordan? So we do have a hand up on the screen, which is Catherine Howells. Do you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Just to add a comment really around the 20% affordable housing. Obviously, it's not explicitly linked to the planning application, but just to make attendees aware that we have been working with Melin to potentially provide some social housing grant for this development. So part of the discussions around that, should planning be agreed today, is that the units would be 100% affordable housing should Melin require public funding for this development to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. Reference affordable housing, if it is sold, or part of it is sold, or one or two, is that as a condition being put on that the application or the applicant in regards to that? If one is sold, then they will require further 106 management?
Well, there's not so much a planning condition because there's the legal agreement in place that will be signed, and the legal agreement is obviously a legally binding document that would control that in the event that if that did take place.
Right. The other question is, Chair, what concerns me is the previous application was an outline planning permission for 13 residential units, and that was refused. What has changed in regards to this one? Because we're talking about 20 residential units now. So I'm wondering what the difference is in regards to refusing that one, but not this one.
The application was submitted sort of 14 or 15 years ago, so obviously I'm not privy to obviously wasn't privy to that exercise of assessing that application. But I have looked, whilst undertaking the assessment of this application, I've obviously looked at that to see if there's any sort of prevalent points. It was an outline consent, so detail was quite sparse. It was just trying to sort of understand the principle of development and sort of get a permission to build on there. I'm trying to recall now what the reasons were. I think it was. I think there may have been parking might have been one, but to be honest with you, without looking back through the decision notes, I can't exactly tell you explicitly why. But I think one of the key concerns was potentially that information submitted with the application was perhaps not of sufficient detail to make an informed assessment.
So officers are quite happy this is not an overdevelopment of this particular site, then, I'm assuming?
No, I mean, I think I'd like to think the officer report is quite detailed in terms of the assessment. I think, whilst I may not have gone over every single piece of detail in this presentation, it would be a very long presentation if I did. I'd like to think that, going through the report, it's outlined why we believe it to be acceptable and compliant with the relevant policies locally and nationally.
Councillor Howells, want to come back?
Thanks, Chair. In relation to the flood on this proposed development, the report suggests that a sort of flood management plan would be required. So I just want to understand a bit about how that works. Would that be secured by legal agreement, or is it a condition that we need to be submitted to us? And secondly, then, if the development is to flood, is there appropriate refuge areas for the properties that are on the ground floor of the flats? Thanks.
So, in terms of the assessment, in terms of sort of the tolerable limits, so the limits that are set out as being acceptable in terms of flooding events. So for a 1 in 100, 1 in 200 year event at this site, it wouldn't flood. So it meets those criteria. In the 1 in 1,000 year event, which is obviously the more extreme flooding event, it would flood. The maximum acceptable height of flood waters is 600 mil. Now, without going back to the report to double check what the height is, it doesn't exceed that. So it is compliant with that. So in terms of ground floor units, they would flood up to an acceptable level in terms of the technical advice note 15 that looks at flooding. So in refuse-wise, I mean, again, it's a tidal flooding event, so it could be predicted. But in terms of the flood heights, it wouldn't be of such a significant height that would fail the policy. And then going back to your point about management plan, we haven't had a management plan provided. We don't typically get them provided, to be honest. I don't know whether we could secure that via condition or not. It's usually a document that is put in place between parties outside of the plan process.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any? Councillor Jordan?
Yeah, Chair, I've just a bit of a query, I think, actually. When they say affordable housing, is that maybe a sort of a breakaway then from social housing, not to do any social housing at all? Because, as we know, it's about 8,000 people on a register for who's homeless or who needs housing. Is this some way they sort of try and get away with giving it to social housing instead?
Can you answer that?
Yeah. Technically, affordable housing is the same as social housing. And there's a definition in planning policy as to what affordable housing is. And it is either social rented accommodation or intermediate housing, such as, for example, low-cost home ownership. So that is what we would be securing as part of the Section 106 agreement, 20% of this, with provisions in place if it wasn't 100% affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, happy. Any other further comments or questions? Okay, thank you. And thank you for your inputs and your presentation. Right, the recommendation is this is granted with conditions and subject to its Section 106 legal agreement. Do I have anybody who is to propose this? Thank you. Councillor Linton, second. Councillor Jones. All those in favour of the proposal, please raise hands. Those against? So that's carried 7-1. Yep. Okay. I think that concludes today's meeting. Let's please get out of here and warm ourselves up a bit.